Let me tell you something most people never think about when they see those soldiers outside the palace. The color red was once the most dangerous thing a man could wear. I know that sounds strange. Today it's the safest thing in the world. You see it in every photograph, on every postcard, behind every smiling tourist who's holding up two fingers and grinning like they've done something clever. That bright scarlet coat, the tall black cap, the frozen face. People treat it like a costume, like the man inside is part of the building. But there was a time when that exact color got men killed. My grandfather knew that better than anyone. And the day I'm going to tell you about, he was 87 years old, and he was standing in a crowd of strangers near the front gates of Buckingham Palace, and he was the only person there who understood what he was actually looking at. His name was Albert Finch. He was my mother's father, and he was the quietest man I ever met. Big hands, slow to talk. He smelled of pipe smoke and shoe polish even in the years when he no longer smoked and no longer had any reason to polish anything. Some habits live in the body long after the reason for them is gone. This was the summer of 1966. I was 11. We'd come down to London on the train, the two of us, because my mother thought it would be good for the old man to get out and see things. That's the way people talked about him then, as if he was a piece of furniture that needed dusting off. I remember the heat. That's the first thing. It was one of those London days where the air doesn't move at all, where the pavement gives the heat back to you through your shoes. The kind of day where everybody is a little bit irritable and pretending they aren't. The crowd outside the gates was thick, tourists mostly, cameras around their necks, those big leather boxes that hung down like they were carrying a load of bricks, families, a school group somewhere off to the side, all in matching caps, a teacher counting heads over and over and never getting the same number twice. Pigeons, always pigeons, and that low hum a crowd makes, hundreds of separate little conversations all blurring into one sound like the sea heard from far away. And there behind the railings stood the guard. Just one where we were, a young man in the red tunic, the bearskin cap on his head so tall it made him look like a giant, the black fur soaking up the sun and giving back nothing. He had a rifle held against his shoulder. He did not move. He did not blink that I could see. Sweat ran down the side of his face from under that enormous cap, and he let it run. He didn't wipe it. He didn't shift his weight. He stood there like the heat was happening to somebody else. People kept walking up to him, standing right beside him for photographs, making faces. One man waved a hand in front of the guard's eyes, very slowly, and laughed when nothing happened, and his wife laughed too, and they took a picture and walked off, pleased with themselves. My grandfather watched all of this without a word. I tugged his sleeve. I wanted to move closer to the front. I was 11 and I wanted to see everything, and there was a gap opening up in the crowd, and I pulled him toward it. He came with me slow, leaning on me a little, and when we got near the railings, close enough that I could have reached out and touched the iron, he stopped. He looked at the young soldier for a long, long time. Then he said something I've never forgotten. He said it quietly, almost to himself. That coat used to be a target. I didn't understand. I was 11. A target for what? And he turned and looked down at me, and there was something in his face I'd never seen before. Not on him. He was always so calm, so closed up, but for a second it cracked open. For the men who wanted to kill us, he said. I need to tell you about my grandfather, because the rest of this won't make sense otherwise. Albert Finch was born in 1879. That's a date that sounds like ancient history now, and it was already old history when I knew him. He'd been a soldier as a young man, a real one, not a ceremonial one. He'd gone off to fight in places I couldn't have found on a map, in a war that even my mother only half understood, against an enemy I never heard him name. And when he went off to fight, he went in red. That's the part people forget. They look at the scarlet tunic today and they think it's always been decoration, a pretty thing, a tradition for the tourists. They think soldiers must have worn something sensible into real battle, something gray or brown, and saved the red for show. No. For hundreds of years, red was what British soldiers fought in. Not for show. For real. The whole army. Whole fields of men in scarlet, marching in straight lines toward whoever they were fighting, while the drums went and the flags went up and the smoke from the guns rolled across everything. There's a reason for the red, and it's not a romantic one. Centuries back, when they were first building proper standing armies, red cloth was cheap and steady to come by, and a uniform color mattered because in the chaos and the smoke of a battlefield you needed to know in one glance who was on your side. You couldn't stop and ask. You just looked for the color. Red meant friend. Anything else meant raise your weapon. So they dressed thousands of men the same. And the color stuck, and the years went by, and the red coat became the thing the whole world pictured when it thought of a British soldier. Other nations feared it. There's an old name for them, the redcoats, and it was spoken with respect and with hate, depending on which end of the line you were standing. My grandfather was one of them. One of the last of them, really, though he didn't know it at the time. He told me bits and pieces over the years, never all at once. He'd let something slip and then go quiet, and you learned not to push, because pushing made him close up tighter. But I gathered over a long time what it had been like. He told me that in his day the coat was made of thick wool, and it was hot, brutally hot, and in some of the places they were sent the heat could kill a man on its own before any enemy got the chance. He told me about the weight of everything they carried. He told me about the boots and the blisters, and marching until your feet bled into the leather. And he told me, this is the part that stayed with me, that when the fighting changed, the red coat became a death sentence. Because the enemy got better rifles. That's the whole thing when you boil it down. For most of history, a man with a gun could only hit something fairly close, and he made a great cloud of smoke when he fired, and so it didn't much matter that you were dressed in bright red, because by the time anyone could see you clearly to aim, you were already on top of them anyway. Standing in a long, bright line was even an advantage. It looked terrifying. It held men together. It worked. But rifles got longer reach. They got more accurate. They started using powder that didn't make all that smoke, so a man could lie hidden and fire and stay hidden, and pick his targets one by one from a distance you couldn't have imagined a generation before. And against that kind of enemy, a bright red coat in an open field is not brave. It's just easy. They could see us coming a mile off, my grandfather said to me once, years after that day at the palace. We glowed. In the sun, against the brown ground, we glowed like a row of lanterns. And they sat in the rocks where you couldn't see them, and they shot us down one at a time, and there was nothing the red could do but make their aim easier. He wasn't bitter when he said it. He was matter of fact. That was worse somehow. So the army changed. They had to. They started dressing men in dull colors instead, browns, the color of dust and dry grass, the color of nothing, the color that lets a man disappear into the ground he's lying on. Khaki, they called it. It comes from an old word that just means dusty, the color of earth. And just like that, after hundreds of years, the red coat walked off the battlefield forever. My grandfather lived right through the middle of that change. He went off to war as a redcoat and he came home in dust brown. He'd worn both. He was a man with one foot in each world, the old one and the new one, and most people around him never even noticed there'd been a change at all. But here's the thing he wanted me to understand. Standing there at the railings in 1966, looking at that boy in scarlet. The red coat didn't die. It just stopped being armor and became something else. The young guard near us couldn't have been more than 19. You could tell if you looked properly instead of just looking at the costume. The skin of his neck above the high collar was young skin. His jaw still had that softness boys have before life hardens it. He was trying so hard to be a statue, to be the frozen thing the tourists wanted, and you could see the effort of it. A statue doesn't have to try. My grandfather studied him, the way a man studies another man's hands to learn his trade. "Look at the buttons," he said to me low. I looked. The buttons on the red tunic ran down the front in a neat row. "Evenly spaced," he said. "One after another, all the same gap. That tells you his regiment. Some of them the buttons go in pairs, some in threes, fours, fives. Each lot of guards has its own. A man who knows can read it like reading a name." I asked him how he knew that. He didn't answer straight away. Then he said, "Because the cloth never lies. The cloth remembers what the men forget." I didn't know what he meant. I'm not sure I fully know now. But I think he was telling me that the uniform carries history in it, stitched into the very shape of it, long after the reasons have been lost. Every detail on that boy's coat had once meant something practical, had once been about survival, about telling friend from enemy, about a man finding his own people in the smoke. And now it was kept exactly as it had been, perfectly, lovingly, even though the smoke was gone and the enemy was gone, and the only thing the coat had to survive was a hot afternoon and 1,000 cameras. That's the secret of the whole thing. Nothing was thrown away. It was just frozen in time, the moment it stopped being useful and kept that way on purpose. The cap is the same. That huge black bearskin, the thing that makes them so tall and strange. My grandfather told me where that came from too, and I've checked it since, and it's true, though it sounds like a story. Long ago, the tallest, fiercest men in an army were the ones who threw the grenades, heavy iron balls of explosive, thrown by hand. Dangerous work. You needed big, strong men with steady nerves for it, and they were the pride of the army. To make them look even bigger and even more frightening, they gave them tall fur caps instead of ordinary hats. A man already 6 feet tall, with a great column of black fur on his head, looked 7 feet of nightmare coming at you through the smoke. The cap had no other purpose. It was there to put fear into the enemy. Fear is a weapon too. And there was one famous fight, long before my grandfather's time, against the most feared soldiers of the most feared general in Europe, the great emperor's own personal guard, men who had never been beaten. The British guards met them and broke them and sent them running. And for that, the story goes, the British guards were given the right to wear the tall fur caps of the men they had defeated. They took the symbol of the enemy's pride and put it on their own heads. So that ridiculous, beautiful, towering hat the tourists laugh at and photograph. It's a trophy. It's a thing earned in the worst day of someone's life, 200 years ago, kept and worn ever since by men who weren't born for a century after the men who earned it died. The boy standing in front of us was wearing a victory that was older than his great-great-grandfather, and he probably knew it. They teach them. The guards know exactly what every piece of it means. That's part of why they can stand so still. You stand differently when you know what you're carrying. I was thinking about none of this at the time, of course. I was 11. I was hot and I wanted an ice cream, and I was getting bored of a man who wouldn't move. But then something started to happen, and I forgot all about the ice cream. There was a group of young men in the crowd, older than me, younger than soldiers, maybe 20, 22. They'd been drinking, even though it was barely past noon. You could hear it in their voices before you understood the words, that loud, loose sound men make when the drink has taken the edges off them. They'd decided the guard was funny. It started small, standing too close, pulling faces. One of them did a stiff little march up and down in front of the boy, swinging his arms, and his friends roared with laughter. People in the crowd laughed too, a bit. It was funny in a way. The boy in red didn't react, not a flicker. That made them want more. The loudest one, tall, red-faced, shirt half open, started talking right into the guard's face, asking him questions, stupid questions and then nastier ones, telling him he wasn't a real soldier, that he was a doll, a toy, that he just stood there because he was too useless to do anything else. The friends egged him on. The crowd had gone quieter now, that uncomfortable quiet when people sense something turning but nobody wants to be the one to step in. I felt my grandfather change beside me. I can't describe it well. He went very still, stiller than he'd been all day, stiller almost than the guard, and his big hand, the one resting on the top of the railing, closed slowly into a fist. The loud one leaned in and flicked the guard's chin strap, just flicked it with one finger like you'd flick a fly. And then he reached up, laughing, showing off, his friends cheering, and grabbed at the bearskin cap, tried to knock it off the boy's head. What happened next happened so fast that half the crowd didn't understand it until it was over. The guard moved. After all that stillness, after standing like stone in the killing heat for who knows how long, he moved, and it was like the stone itself had come to life and decided to fall on you. His boot came down on the ground with a crack that I swear I felt in my chest from where I was standing. His whole body snapped around. The rifle came off his shoulder and across his front in one hard motion, the steel of it catching the sun, and he brought it down to the level. And there was a bayonet on the end of it, a real one, a long blade of bright metal, and it was suddenly pointing at the men. And the boy's voice tore out of him in a shout so loud and so sudden that the woman next to me actually screamed. I don't remember the exact words. It was a warning, a challenge, the kind of thing a soldier shouts when he means it. Stand back, make way, something that left no room for argument at all. The drunk men weren't laughing now. The tall one fell back so fast he tripped over his own feet and went down on the pavement, and his friends scattered like the pigeons had scattered, and the whole crowd surged back away from the railings with a single gasp. And for one frozen second, the only things moving in that whole enormous space were that bayonet, catching the light, and the boy's chest, heaving once, twice behind it. And then it was over. The guard brought the rifle back up to his shoulder. He turned his head front again. He stamped once, hard and settled, and within about 5 seconds he was a statue once more, perfectly still, sweat running down his face as if nothing at all had happened. But everyone understood now. He wasn't a doll, he wasn't a toy, he wasn't part of the building. He was a soldier, a real one, with a real weapon and real training and the absolute right to use both. The stillness had never been weakness. The stillness had been the whole point. He could move like lightning any moment he chose, and the discipline, the terrible patience, was choosing not to 1,000 times a day until the one moment it was needed. The drunk men were gone, hurried off, swallowed by the crowd, suddenly very interested in being somewhere else. A pair of police officers were coming over, unhurried, having seen the whole thing. The crowd was buzzing now, that high excited buzz that comes after a fright, everyone telling everyone else what they'd just seen as if they hadn't all seen it together. And the boy in red was already gone back into his stillness, his eyes front, his face blank as though it would never crack again. But my grandfather hadn't moved. He was still standing at the railing, very straight, straighter than I'd seen him stand in years. He usually carried himself bent, the way old men do, folded down by all the years. But now his shoulders had come back and his chin had come up, and for a second I could see the soldier inside the old man, the way you can sometimes see the boy inside an old face. And then he did something I'll remember until the day I die. He let go of my shoulder. He took the strain onto his own legs, though it must have hurt him. He brought his heels together, slow, careful, the old wool of his trousers whispering. He straightened his back fully, the last inch of it, and I heard something in his spine click, and I'm sure it cost him. And he raised his right hand to his brow. He saluted. An old man, 87 years old, in a borrowed jacket with his medals pinned, crooked on the chest because his hands shook too much now to get them straight. He stood at the railing in the heat, and he saluted that 19-year-old boy in the red coat. People stared. Of course they did. Some of them probably thought he was confused, a daft old man playing soldier. One woman near us smiled the way you smile at children, and the very old, kind, and a little bit pitying, and I felt my face go hot with shame, because I was 11 and I didn't understand yet, and at 11 the worst thing in the world is being stared at. But the guard understood. I was watching his face. I was close enough. And the guard's eyes, which were front, which were not allowed to move, which had not moved for any drunk man or any camera or any joke all afternoon. His eyes flicked. Just once, just for half a second, down and to the side to the old man at the railing standing at the salute, and then front again. That's all it was. Half a second, a flick of the eyes that nobody but me probably even saw. But I saw it, and I understood, years later, what had passed between them in that half second. The boy in red could not break his stillness. Not for this. The rules were the rules, and he held to them, the way he'd held to them all day, the way the patience and the discipline demanded. He could not salute an old man back. He could not even turn his head. But for half a second he let himself look. And in that look there was the only thing he was allowed to give, which was this: I see you. I know what you are. I know what you wore and where you wore it, and I know it was not a costume on you. It was the real thing. And I am wearing the same red you bled in, and I will keep it exactly as it was, and I will stand here in it until I drop so that it is never forgotten. That's what passed between them. The man who wore the red when it could get you killed, and the boy who wears it now that it only gets you photographed. 70 years between them, two completely different worlds, and the same coat, the same color, the exact same stitching and buttons, and that great trophy cap won 200 years before either of them was born. One of them had carried it into the smoke, the other carried it forward through the peace. Both of them were soldiers. The job had only looked like it changed. My grandfather held the salute for maybe 3 seconds. Then he brought his hand down slow, and the soldier went out of his body again, and he was just an old man, tired now, breathing hard from the effort of standing so straight. He put his hand back on my shoulder, heavier than before, leaning his weight on me again. "Come on, lad," he said, very quiet. "I've seen what I came to see." We walked away from the palace slowly, the two of us, into the noise of the city. I bought him a cup of tea at a stall, and he drank it with both hands wrapped around the cup, though it was the hottest day of the year, the way old men do. He didn't say much, he never said much, but on the train home, when it was getting dark and the fields were going by black against a purple sky, he spoke once more about it, out of nowhere, the way he always did. "They think it's a show," he said. He was looking out the window, not at me. "All those people with their cameras, they think the lad's standing there to be looked at, to make a nice picture for the postcard." He shook his head. "He's standing there to remember. The whole point of him is to remember. Everything the rest of us are allowed to forget, he's not allowed to forget any of it. He carries it for all of us. That's the job. That's always been the job. The coat was armor once. Now the coat is memory. And memory's a heavier thing to carry than armor ever was, because armor you can take off at the end of the day." That's the longest speech I ever heard him make. He died the following winter in his sleep, which is more than most men of his trade ever got. We buried him with his medals on, straight this time, because someone with steady hands pinned them. I'm an old man myself now, older than I ever thought I'd get. And I've been back to the palace many times over the years, and I've stood at those same railings, and I've watched the guards in their red coats and their great black caps standing perfectly still in the heat, while the world walks past laughing and taking its pictures. And I want to tell those people something every single time. I want to say, look closer. That isn't a costume. That isn't decoration. That red was the most dangerous thing a man could wear once. Men died in their thousands in that color, in fields a long way from here, because being seen was the whole idea, right up until the day the world changed and being seen got you killed and they had to let the red go. But they didn't throw it away. They couldn't. Some things are too important to be useful, so they kept it perfect, frozen at the moment it stopped being armor, and they put it on their best young men and they sent them out to stand still in front of all of us, holding the memory upright so the rest of us don't have to. The cloth remembers what the men forget. My grandfather told me that, and I didn't understand it, and now I'm older than he was that day and I understand it completely. And every time I see that flash of scarlet behind the railings, standing so still in the sun, I think of an old soldier raising a shaking hand to a boy who wasn't allowed to raise his back. And I remember that the red coat never really left the battlefield. It just learned how to stand guard over the dead.